400 years ago, two friends of the recently deceased William Shakespeare did a revolutionary thing for their friend and peer. John Hemming and Henry Condell, who'd been named in Shakespeare's will and allotted money for mourning rings, conspired against social norms, good fiscal planning, and just plain common sense, putting together the First Folio and publishing what is now considered one of the most important books in the history of English literature. The First Folio collects 36 plays, 18 of which had not been previously published. Let's put a very fine point on that. Without the work of Shakespeare's friends, we wouldn't have Macbeth, The Tempest, As You Like It, or Julius Caesar today. No.
Something wicked this way comes.
Not a peep of
all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players.
And depressingly, no 10 Things I Hate About You, which was based on The Taming of the Shrew, another of the unpublished works.
Oh, pretty baby!
The act itself was bold, not unlike printing, embossing, and binding in tooled leather a collection of really good Instagram posts that got a lot of likes.
I love this line from Romeo and Juliet, when Juliet talks about if she could kill him and then I'll cut him up in little stars and put him in the night sky, and it's just such like a violent, horny sort of...
Theater was the opiate of the masses for Elizabethan Europe, and folios as a format were referred for topics of social weight, long-term importance, and intellectual prestige. And the work was hard. It was undoubtedly expensive, but they made it anyways. Mr. William Shakespeare's Comedies, Histories, and Tragedies, i.e. the First Folio, published in 1623, was a revolution. And without it, University of Oxford Shakespeare scholar Emma Smith says, we wouldn't even be talking about Shakespeare. They took on this expensive, frustrating, complex, foolish project because they loved their friend's work. And we know so because they added their own sort of sweet homages in the introduction. They believed that Shakespeare's work transcended the showtime and deserved to be treated as well as any important work of art. They write, his mind and hand went together, and what he thought he uttered with that easiness that we have scarce received from him a blot in his papers. But it is not our province who only gather his works and give them to you to praise him. Read him, therefore, again and again. The 900-page book was also edited as it was printed, without replacing the errored pages. And so, like Honus Wagner cards, each of the 235 remaining copies of the First Folio are different, some substantially. Many have reader doodles and annotations. Some have entirely repeated sections filling in for missing parts, and one is pierced with a bullet hole. The round was stopped at Titus Andronicus, and Shakespearean scholar Eric Rasmussen quipped, which is clearly an impenetrable play. The book's introduction also included lists of original actors in the company and what is considered the best portrait of the playwright, as it was made contemporaneously and selected by people who knew him personally. The collection is also the first time that Shakespeare's plays are sorted into comedies, histories, and tragedies, which is a convention that stands today. The folios have often been stolen, and tracking them down is not unlike a Dewey Decimal Indiana Jones. A copy was brought to scholars in 2002 saying that it came from one of Fidel Castro's bodyguards, but had actually been taken from a university library. Check out Rally's Grateful Dead poster backstory for more references to library theft that is very bad, but also fun to read about. Another copy was hanging out in a Country Manners library after Oxford's Bodleian Library replaced their First Folio with the, in our words here, updated and enhanced Third Folio in the 1640s, treating it like a new release of a chemistry textbook. In Japan, a copy was hidden from view until 13 years after the owner's death, terms that were laid out in their last will and testament. It still hasn't been seen or authenticated. Raleig's copy is from a small run called the Fourth Folio. Printed in 1685 and continuing the train of original publishing agreements, this edition stood out as the document of record through the whole following century, but later scholarship refocused onto the First Folio as the closest to Shakespeare's original language and canon. There are good reasons for both of these points of view. Each version of the folios tweaked the language to more closely match contemporary literary usage, which was common but probably not ideal. There were also huge discrepancies between some of the play's quarto versions and inconsistencies between different people typesetting the manuscripts. Here is a wide side-eye to you, compositor E, who had, quote, significant difficulties in dealing with manuscript copy. All of these errors, changes, and omissions were things that they would try to fix between each edition of the folios. Most notably, the third folio publisher, Philip Chetwynd, added 7 plays that he had attributed to Shakespeare. His process was faulty, but not totally crazy pants. He turned out to be right on Pericles, but not the rest of them. Both the third and fourth versions contain the same extra plays. Each edition was considered, in its time, an improvement, and the fourth and final folio is the largest, and in Sotheby's words, stateliest, as it's printed on larger royal paper stock. And by the time that the fourth folios went out into the world, we're here, in present day, with a pretty solid set of work, half of which we'd likely have no idea about without these friends' labors. There are treasures in this world that were designed to be precious from the start. There are amazingly valuable things that are worth so much because of a combination of scarcity and an unforecastable place in history. The Shakespeare folios are a little bit of both. The work that they document was intended to be smart and insightful and moving, but also temporary and ephemeral and sometimes very casual. The value was in performing the plays, you know. But the folios, organized by John Hemming and Henry Condell, friends of Shakespeare, took up a gauntlet to not just document the work, but to force the acceptance of it as capital A art. Mr. William Shakespeare's comedies, histories, and tragedies is wonderfully the legacy of a couple of guys who were unwilling to let their friends' work fade into obscurity. Folio finders, a real and pretty obsessive thing, have documented their censuses of known authentic First Folios. Rasmussen's The Shakespeare First Folios, a descriptive catalog, covers his work, and Andrea Mays's The Millionaire and the Bard, Henry Folger's obsessive hunt for Shakespeare's First Folios, covers Folger's global hunt.